que sepa que vamos a grabar la sesión y que va a quedar pública en el canal de YouTube del máster. Muy bien. Si ya está grabando, Mariana, ¿me avisas? ¿En la nube? Perfecto. Muy bien, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas las que están aquí hoy presentes en esta nueva serie de clases que hemos denominado Global Accessibility Leaders. Que van a ser unas sesiones que va a presentar nuestra profesora del Máster en Accesibilidad Digital para Educación, Comunicación y Diseño, la profesora Susana Paliero, que hemos coordinado estas sesiones en colaboración con la Fundación DALAT y con el apoyo de la IAP México. Entonces, como no me quiero demorar mucho en esta presentación y quiero dejar el espacio para Rain Markers, que es un honor tenerla aquí y estamos muy agradecidas por esta gentileza, que vamos a aprovecharla mucho, doy paso entonces a Susana Paliero para que haga su primera intervención y presentación correspondiente. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Chris. Y bueno, acá voy a hacer una aclaración y es que yo voy a estar hablando en inglés para estar conversando con Rain y que sea más ordenado. Mi inglés no es el mejor, pero bueno. Y vamos a tener un segundo canal, que es el canal en español, donde ustedes van a poder escuchar toda la charla en español. Así que ahora voy a cambiar a inglés. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome, Rain. Thank you because I know that your calendar is pretty tight and you made time to come here, so we are very thankful for that. I will introduce you first briefly because I know that you are too humble to let us know all the things that you actually do. So let me be the one reading your bio. Okay, so Rain is a senior staff UX design manager at Google, where she focuses on accessibility, of course, internationalization, and universal product design. With a deeply intersectional background, Rain holds an MA in education, individuals with intellectual disabilities and autism, alongside an MFA in film production. And she previously served as a member of the W3C Cognitive Accessibility Task Force. That's where I had the chance to meet her. And as an autistic professional raising two neurodivergent children, she brings a combination of lived experience, academic grounding, and industry leadership to her work. And Rain is dedicated to moving accessibility from compliance to creative innovation. That's actually what we are going to talk about today. And sharing digital experiences and emerging technologies inherently include all cognitive styles. Okay, thank you so much for being here, Rain, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here, and thank you for the invitation and the very nice introduction. So we're going to talk about designing for cognitive autonomy, or for me personally, the language around cognitive disability or cognitive accessibility can be quite difficult. Sometimes people identify as or have a disability. Sometimes people have cognitive differences. So instead of focusing on whether it's a disability or a difference, what we're really wanting to look at here is cognitive autonomy in these digital spaces. And with what's happening now in our world and the rapidity, how rapidly the technology is advancing right now, it's this wonderful opportunity for us to start thinking very creatively about how people might actually interact with technology in new ways that open up a lot of different opportunities. So Susanna already introduced me, so I'll go ahead and skip that. The big question I'd really like to put forth, or would really like to have you thinking about by the end of this conversation, is how might we leverage emerging technology to empower all individuals with different cognitive profiles to achieve a high quality of life? And so I'm going to share a couple different stories for you. And I'm going to use the concept of dementia, or kind of age-related cognitive decline, as the basis for these stories because this is a cognitive disability that a lot of people can kind of understand or are familiar with. So the first thing that we're going to do, the first story that we're going to follow here is two individuals that I've named Tam and Tara. And Tam is a 72-year-old grandfather. He's been recently diagnosed with dementia. And Tara is his 28-year-old granddaughter who's living abroad, and she has a newborn. So Tam wakes up early to an alarm, which he set the night before in anticipation of a dentist appointment. He knows he has to do something important today, but he can't really remember what it is. So he looks at his calendar. Something's there on his calendar, but he can't really read it. He doesn't really understand it. The way that it's formatted isn't familiar to him. So he remembers that his granddaughter was always really good at remembering everyone's birthdays and anniversaries and thinks maybe she knows what he's forgetting. It's only 7 a.m. And while he knows that his granddaughter gets up early, he decides maybe he should make himself some tea before calling her. So he puts a water kettle on the stove. He doesn't realize he's turned the kettle on. He's set it on low. And so now he's ready to give Tara a call. He gets frustrated while he's trying to use his phone to call her because there's so many different buttons to press and he's not sure what if he presses the wrong one. He has a moment of being unclear. Is her name actually Tara? It has Tara written on there, but he used to call her Flower. There's no flower on his phone, so he's going to tap Tara because he's pretty sure, but he's not confident, so there's a little bit of anxiety there. He does succeed. He calls Tara, but Tam has forgotten that she's living abroad now, so it's not 7 a.m. for Tara. It's the middle of the night. She has a newborn. It's in the middle of the night. She's nursing her newborn. She's exhausted. She's experiencing new parent brain confusion. So she sees a call coming in from her grandfather and she panics, answering immediately with audible anxiety. This creates a moment of stress for both Tam and Tara. She's very worried about him, and in that moment, the forgotten teapot starts to whistle, adding to the sounds, adding to the urgency. This anxiety impacts Tara's newborn, who stops feeding and starts crying, and now there's a cacophony of noise. So all of these are real-world moments, and the story that I told doesn't necessarily seem to be related to digital interfaces, but that's what I'd like to challenge as we're now entering this world where the capabilities of the digital interfaces are phenomenal. So we're hearing this story that is very real for a lot of people. I made this up, but it's based on real world experiences and how messy lives happen. And it has this high stress impact on these individuals. Now we're going to switch to a different story. And a different way that this kind of experience might play out. So we're going to shift to Cam and Cara. Cam is a retired novelist, recently diagnosed with early stage dementia. And Cara is his spouse. Cara is an accomplished illustrator and is on a book tour abroad. So Cam wakes up early to his alarm. He looks at the alarm, he sees a button, what's on my agenda today? He doesn't feel like moving to press the button. So he says, okay, tell me what I've got to do out loud in a conversational way. The alarm replies back to him. You have a dentist appointment at 9, which is in 2 hours. There isn't anything else on your schedule today, but Cara is in New Zealand on the book tour. Would you like a reminder to call her during one of the breaks? Cam worries that he maybe forgot to call her yesterday and maybe she's mad at him. So he looks at his phone to try to figure it out, but he can't. So then he asks, did I make any calls yesterday? And he gets a verbal answer. Yes, you called Cara twice. She answered once, and once you left a voicemail. Cam now decides he wants some tea, so he puts the water kettle on the stove. He doesn't remember that he's done this. He leaves the stove to go get dressed. The stove starts beeping at him as he moves away, and it sends a text message to Cara. Cara is able to press a button really quickly on her phone to send a call recording to Cam that says in her voice, "Hey, Cam, don't forget the stove. By the way, this is a recording, and I'll talk with you later. Love you." Cam hears this message, remembers that he was making tea, finishes up, turning off the stove, soothed by her voice, aware that it was a recording. And then about 45 minutes before his appointment, he hears a gentle beeping sound from his watch. He feels a slight vibration on his watch and he checks it. And it says, "Your dentist appointment starts in 40 minutes. It's time to head out." So now the digital things that he's interacting with throughout his day are supporting his executive functioning without relying on memory that he may not have access to right now. And they're also supporting Cara in knowing that Cam is taken care of, that Cam has what he needs. This story is a possibility. And I would argue that it's a possibility today based on where technology has advanced with AI in just the last few months. Obviously, it's not necessarily something that we've built into people's lives yet, but if we're innovative and creative, I think it could be. And so this is kind of the future or the idea that I would like to think about in terms of what's possible in the world of people today and in supporting cognitive autonomy. I want to really quickly touch on a concept of a triangle of care. So for many individuals with cognitive disabilities or differences, they are quite independent individuals, but for some, the impact of their cognitive disability or difference may be so significant that they have a care partner and a triangle of care supporting them. So that care partner might be a family member, a loved one, a friend. And that's in the stories that I told, those care partners would be Tara and Cara. And also in the triangle of care is the practitioners that the individual might interact with. So speech language therapists, physical therapists, psychologists, anyone that the individual might need to interact with, their primary care doctors. These are kind of the professionals that they might interact with. And those are also part of their triangle of care. And then the third point on the triangle of care is the individual themselves. And it's really important to recognize that when there is a triangle of care involved, the individual is just as important in that triangle as all of the other individuals are. Right, I already spoke through who each of these individuals are in people's lives without showing the slides, so I'm going to advance through them. And as we think about this triangle of care and as we think about cognitive autonomy, we really want to make sure that we're remembering that both matter. The individual's cognitive autonomy matters, and we want to support that. The care provider matters. The care partner matters. They are also humans with their own complex lives and probably also cognitive stressors that are changing how they're interacting with technology, given that they are care partners for somebody. And then, of course, the people who are the professionals, they are also going to be interacting with the technology, and they're going to have their own unique needs, such as privacy for their patient and really being concerned about the privacy and safety of the individuals that they work with. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm sort of collapsing down to 5 principles that are examples of how we can design and what we can keep at the sort of core of our work as we're thinking about what we create for people in the future and starting today. And so those 5 principles are flexibility, contextual awareness, comfort, clarity, and reliability. So we'll start with flexibility. It's important to allow the individual to interact their own way and on their own time with their own quirks of language and their own patterns of behavior. The individual may not know that specific words are meant to be used. I will say we have smart home devices in my own home, and They never understand me, and one of my children has echolalia, and it often gives up on my child before they can finish what they want to say to the smart home devices. So these are very real experiences where you might not know the word, you might have echolalia as an experience. You might be using similar words or be speaking in a different language than whatever the thing that you're interacting with has as its primary language. So really allowing for that flexibility of understanding and how people speak. And we talked about some of this in the context of Tam and Cam and Cara and Tara, where Cam was able to say, you know what, I don't want to touch the button. I just want to know what's going on. So it's giving him that flexibility. So what I'm now showing on the screen is an example of what this might look like that some colleagues and I published years ago, actually, before the conversational agents had the capabilities that they have now, as sort of this dream of what could be a future interaction for an individual with dementia. So what's being shown here is there are large blocks on the screen that the individual can touch to activate a specific command. And so one of those commands is add to my calendar. And what tapping add to my calendar does in this example is it begins a conversation with the device. And the first part of that conversation is the device or the agent asking, tell me what you want to add. And then the person will say, a doctor's appointment. There's flexibility built in. The person has only set a doctor's appointment, and now the agent itself is able to start to think about, okay, what kind of doctor? When might the appointment be? What types of questions do I need to ask this individual in order to properly put this calendar entry into their calendar? So in this case, the next thing that it says is, okay, when is the appointment? And then the person says back, tomorrow at this time. So the person hasn't said the actual time, but the agent is capable of understanding based on the context what time it is right now. So then it can respond back, great, I'm adding an appointment for tomorrow, Friday, January 14th. So specifying so that the person actually knows that that's what it put in there at 10:30 a.m. Is this correct? And the conversation will continue like this. So the person will say yes. Then the conversation will ask, well, which doctor? The person maybe calls the doctor, Dr. P, and the agent knows enough to know, oh, this person has two different doctors that have the letter P at the start of their name. So now I can ask this person which doctor it is and help them get to the point of having the correct calendar entry. And I can even talk the person through setting up some kind of a reminder. Again, all of this is really possible to design into interfaces today. It wasn't when we first published this example, but it really is now. Some of the important things in here, aside from kind of that flexibility of how the conversation is happening, is to sort of think back to fuzzy search. So I don't even remember how long ago fuzzy search became a thing in UIs, but it was a while ago, maybe 10 years ago or something like that, where instead of having to search with the exact word and everything spelled correctly, you could misspell something, or you could put something in pretty close, and then it would provide recommendations and say, oh, did you mean this or did you mean that? And fuzzy search is a really good example, a really simple example of that flexibility. As we're moving into these more kind of interactive and conversational experiences, we want to make sure that we're leveraging the possibility to expand that fuzziness, to say, hey, there's a lot of extrapolation that can happen here, and we may be able to give people even more flexibility. The second principle is contextual awareness. So this is to design with awareness that the individual needs of a person will change throughout the day based on the time of day, location, who is around, the person's energy levels, and more. this may be something that everyone here can identify with, where in the morning, you're ready to take on multiple tasks at once and get onto public transportation and get the right stop. And then by the end of the day, you're really, really tired and you're a little less confident that you're going to be able to do all of this without actually carefully thinking about it in the moment. Our cognitive functioning changes throughout the day and based on the pressures that are around us. So if we look at each member of the care triangle and we think about, okay, well, what does that mean for the different points on that triangle? For an individual, that can mean increased anxiety because they're hungry, or they don't know if a meal is coming, or they can't remember if they just ate. And so they don't know, is it okay if they eat again? It may be that they just heard a bird song that really makes them happy, something very specific and comfortable for them. And so they're feeling calm and patient. For the care partner, there might be the baby in their arms that's crying to be fed while their loved one is asking for something in the moment. In my own life, it can be both of my children needing completely opposite things from me at exactly the same time and not being able to process the fact that I'm being pulled in two directions, and I also have my own challenges with that. So they're also, though, the care partner could be in a moment that's been planned, where they're 100% focused on their loved one without distraction, and they're able to be fully immersed as a care partner. For the professional, there's times when they're working with their individual remotely or over a video call, and they're unable to see what's going on around the person. So they don't really know what that person's context is. Or they might be face-to-face with the individual and able to really understand the fullness of that context. So these are just some examples of how the experience, the personal experience outside of the technology itself, can actually deeply impact how somebody's going to be able to interact with the technology. So an example of what this means would be adapting to the moment itself in which somebody is interacting. So what if the technology knew where the individual was at the moment and adapted to that moment? What if we could detect that the person has just eaten a meal? We have to think about privacy in these contexts, but what if there are certain things that we could detect? We know the person's just eaten a meal, and we know that they're in a state right now of wanting to be challenged, wanting to sort of solve puzzles for themselves, versus knowing that this person is really tired and needs a higher level of scaffolding in the UI. Are we able to adapt our UIs, our user interfaces, to actually meet the person where they are, as opposed to sticking with something rigid where they're expected to interact the same way at all times? Another example of contextual awareness would be supporting different levels of remote interaction. So kind of an example here that's pretty canonical is that sometimes care partners need to support their loved ones with technology assistance, and they need to change settings or help them log in from far away. They're not actually physically with the person. And this is probably something many people who are listening right now have also directly experienced, where somebody is, on the phone with you saying, hey, I can't get this thing to work. So what does that mean in terms of how we build our interfaces? Do we actually build opportunities for partnership in actually getting into controlling the settings and helping people through those interfaces? Do we have that built into what's possible in the interaction flow? So really thinking about that as an important part of the interfaces that are being designed. Because as much as we may want to think that we're designing for a certain person for whom maybe the care triangle isn't relevant, that isn't actually going to necessarily always be the case. There are many people in this world who live full, active lives and are fully engaged in technology who do have a care triangle and that they really rely on to help them kind of navigate life in various ways. The third design principle here is comfort. And I'm just going to talk through this one. I'm not going to show individual slides for it because it's more about kind of how are we making the person feel in this exchange. So individuals with cognitive disabilities and differences can also experience heightened anxiety due to uncertainty, due to difficulty being understood or expressing themselves, due to a working memory challenge. So, in the case of an individual who's experiencing early stage dementia, those questions of, will my loved one actually come and pick me up? Or am I okay? Or did I forget my medicine? In the case of the story of the mother whose grandfather calls her and she's nursing her child, there's that anxiety of, how do I calm my baby down? Do I know this person's okay? I don't know. So there's this heightened anxiety that's happening in these moments. For individuals with reading disabilities, this can be not just an anxiety of not necessarily being able to read the words, but a literal physical exhaustion that happens because the eyes are actually tired, from more exhausted than, say, somebody without a reading disability trying to read. So this kind of anxiety and this exhaustion, it can be very overwhelming and can really move somebody from the context where they're kind of patient and willing to kind of make their way through something to highly stressed and not really able to take that moment to settle in and say, okay, how do I do this? So the best support is to really figure out, how do you comfort, how do you provide an answer to whatever that person's question is as quickly as possible. So are there ways that the technology can really be leveraged to recognize the individual's needs and to say, okay, here, I'm going to provide some assurance. Going back to the two stories at the beginning, if we think about Cam and Kara, where Kara was able to send Cam a message to say, hey, the stove is on, and oh, this is a recording. If you try to talk to me right now, you won't be able to, because this is a recording, but it's my voice. It's comfortable for you. And it's human. It's a moment of connection. And I'm also confirming for you that it's a recording, but I will call you later. So it's all those steps in that interaction that are creating that comfort. Possibly the most important one, and I think in some ways the most misunderstood or misapplied, would be clarity. And when we think about clarity, we're thinking about ensuring that the design and interaction flows are clear, they're direct, they're unambiguous, and they can only be interpreted in one way, even if that means more words and more steps. Well, we very often tend in the world of UX to think about what's the most efficient path we can get people from one place to another, and thinking kind of less is more. But when it comes to people with cognitive disabilities and differences, sometimes more can actually be better. Slowing it down, making it a little less efficient, and adding in some gentle, comforting friction can also be really helpful. So what does this mean? Well, there's a lot of really great information in the cognitive accessibility guidance from the W3C, which there's a link to at the end of this. A lot of ideas of specifically how to apply this. I'm going to share a couple, and they're going to center around choosing accurate words rather than shorter ones. For example, this particular title slide here says Design Principle 4, Clarity, rather than just 4, Clarity. If somebody who is part of this conversation right now does have a working memory or a short-term memory challenge, or is maybe distracted by multitasking, you may not remember that we're in the middle of design principles. So just saying 4, Clarity might actually leave you wondering, what is clarity actually referring to here? So an example of clarity, this is one of my favorite ones, and this is one thing at a time. So I wish if we were in a room together right now, I would ask how many of you have looked at a recipe and it's one big block of text and all the steps are together and you're trying to figure out what did you already do and where are you, and you're worried that you're going to mess up your recipe because you have to try to figure out where you are. So, in my dream world, we'd never be looking at a recipe where we see multiple steps at once. We would be looking at exactly one step of the recipe at a time. So in the illustration that I have right here, it's step 2, preheat the oven. And I've added a little nuance here on the slide where the temperature to which you are preheating the oven is in bold, so that if you're somebody who does, say, have a reading disability or struggles with attention, that your eyes can go directly to that most important thing. Another example of clarity would be providing access to the details. This is often referred to as progressive disclosure. And the idea being that, some people just want to get into something really quickly. They want to see the top level and then they want to move on. Maybe it's something that they do a lot and they just kind of need a reminder, this is where I'm at. But sometimes people really want to dig into the details. So if we think about progressive disclosure, we're really thinking about, we provide ways for people to see or have access to the kind of essential bare minimum, along with a very straightforward affordance to be able to expand that and see a lot more information if and when they want to. And then the 5th design principle that we're going to talk about here is reliability. Providing or prioritizing accuracy and trust and assurance so that everything is correct over the concept of efficiency and speed. So kind of continuing on with that idea of maybe sometimes the flow does need to be slowed down. Maybe efficiency isn't always going to be the best user experience. So thinking about this, if you think, if an individual isn't confident that things are accurate, one of the big things that they might do, probably one of the big things that you would do, is go back a step, double check, spend time worrying. And all of those kind of small actions that somebody might do to double check, they all cut into the time savings that are maybe gained by efficiency of moving a little bit more quickly with a little less reliability. So some examples of what this might look like. One would be to verify the person's intention. So in the example that I have up here, we have checks that will, again, slow the user down. We'll ask them to confirm. So somebody said that they want to cancel something and it's giving them a message. Are you sure you want to cancel this? And they actually have to click a button or activate a control that says, yes, cancel appointment. So they are doubly confirming that, yes, in fact, this is the action that they want to take. And then also keep in mind that it's easy for anyone in a care triangle to make these kinds of mistakes. If a care provider, a professional, is caring for multiple people, they might mix up in a moment who it is that they're trying to support. A loved one might think maybe they're supporting themselves, or maybe they're in a moment of anxiety because of what's going on around them. So the other piece to this is not just saying, are you sure you want to cancel, but now continuing with that confirmation in here. It's an appointment with a specific person. So calling out that person's name on a specific date. What's going to happen when you move forward with this confirmation? And then is there another way to handle this that's not digital? So in this case, there's an option to call the number and then providing the number, then that's sort of a human in the loop approach, as opposed to sending everything through the digital path. So creating kind of multiple ways to check that intention and enable somebody to sort of return from a mistake. Additionally, and kind of continuing on some of what we were sharing in the last slide, is to think about providing specific confirmation. So in this example here, there's a dialogue up that says, Document received. So the concept is that somebody has uploaded a document, and now you're telling them, yes, your document was successfully uploaded. This is the name of the document, so that you can actually verify that it was the document that you intended to upload. And then an idea of when the person might be contacted if there needs to be some kind of response to that document. So just giving more people a little bit clarity, this is the confirmation of exactly what happened. Asking for permission is also a really important part of reliability. So when you're thinking about people navigating their space, especially if you're thinking about in the health space, or whenever privacy or personal information is involved, in the example here, we're saying share past medical test results. So this person has activated something that will share medical results with a specific care team, and kind of the span of those test results will be from a very specific range of dates. So it's asking you, are you sure you want to share this? This is exactly what you're sharing, and this is exactly who you're sharing it with, and giving you that moment to confirm your permission. And then, of course, we're in the age of AI, and a lot of what I shared with you already is only really possible now because of what AI is making possible. And we all know that AI is not, it's not really actually all-knowing, and it doesn't necessarily get everything right. So considering the accuracy of that output, when you can't really be sure in the age of generative AI that your output is in fact accurate, enable the user to find out more, enable the user to double check or understand how that accuracy is, what's the confidence in that accuracy? Does the person actually have the ability to go and double check the sources? And, but the other important piece of this goes back to comfort, providing comfort. We have seen a lot of these warnings. This is AI generated, and they can often look very, very scary. So at the same time as providing that confirmation of reliability and saying, okay, well, this is generated, and here are the sources, or here's how you know more about this, you're trying to do it in a way that's comfortable and reassuring and calming, rather than a way that's going to trigger anxiety. So in this case, I've used a little orange check mark with a kind of a multi-point star as the badge for this, instead of an exclamation point that's red and in a triangle, which is often used to represent warning in UIs. So just kind of changing that, that narrative. All right. I have a couple of recommendations here for further reading on this slide that's up right now. I can't recommend Kat Holmes's book Mismatch enough. It was, she did write it before AI was a big thing, but it's going to be relevant forever. And it's really a wonderful way of kind of recognizing how our perspective and who we sort of include and exclude in our understanding of the world shapes how we design, and how we design shapes who's included and excluded. So it's a really great book. Of course, the cognitive accessibility guidelines from WCAG are also really helpful, and both DQ and Mozilla have COCA guidelines that they've publicly published as well, that are also really nice and well laid out and very accessible. My call to action for everyone here is that as you design, that you consider all parts of human messiness and cognitive behavior in how you design. And that you really kind of collaborate together with how users engage with the world, and think about how can this technology and how can these interfaces actually improve quality of life for the individual, just in the basic way that those interactions are created. And really remembering to recognize that it's this world is super messy, and how we interact is super, super messy. And having that as kind of a basis for every interaction flow and every path that you design. So we all have the power to make lives better for everyone through technology. And I really am excited that people are here listening to this, because it means that you are people who will be making that happen. And I'll stop the talking part here and open up for questions.
Thank you very much, Rain. Super interesting what you brought. I would like to, I will start with the questions, but I already have some questions, and then I will ask some other questions that we have in the chat already. But I was wondering, because I usually perceive cognitive accessibility as something more, not, I wouldn't say subjective, but not as easy and yes and no, like a Boolean thing, than, for example, WCAG. WCAG is something that we work constantly with. So in accessibility work specifically, we often start with conformance, criteria, audits, and checklists. However, the concept of cognitive autonomy, right, challenges this mindset in some way. How does our approach need to change when we move from asking, does this conform, to asking, does this support cognitive autonomy and independent use?
Yes, it's a really great question, and it doesn't have an easy answer, which is why the cognitive accessibility guidance is still not in the actual WCAG criteria, because with the actual WCAG criteria, you can have a pass-fail, as you're saying. Does it have alt text or not? Yes, no. That's quite easy. What's not as easy is the alt text that's actually being included here alt text that will truly help people have the same experience that they would have had if they were seeing the image. And that is highly subjective, and it depends on the context of the purpose of the image in the first place, of the content that's there, of the author's intent, and then also how people kind of understand the representations of what, and the symbolism of what is being presented. So it does become very subjective. So how to think through this? Well, it's, first of all, testing with real users is super important, and making sure that those users include people with cognitive differences is also super, super important. When it's very kind of common or easy to go out and do a survey of a large number of people and get a bunch of data back, and the overwhelming number of responses may lean towards a specific finding. But there might be this very small, quite divergent response that's exactly the opposite of what the rest of the findings say. And because it's so small, it's easy to say, okay, well, that's a very small number of people, so we need to go with this. But what that could really point to is that there is actually a cognitive difference that these people are experiencing, and it's causing them, there's something in the interaction that is creating a barrier for those individuals. And that's going to be, it's a much more manual way of figuring this out, but it is then, say, being able to kind of have those Boolean, those yes, no, on, off type tests. But it is really important to at least do a little bit of that work beyond really just thinking about kind of any user, but actually specifically think about, okay, well, what about users with these needs? Well, there's also a certain amount that you can do with what are called heuristic walkthroughs yourself. So if you take a moment and think about, okay, if I'm, maybe you're somebody who understands that ADHD impacts focus in different ways. You don't really know what that does, but it impacts focus. So you can say, okay, if I'm receiving a phone call at the same time as I'm trying to do this, and then somebody asks me a question from across the room, am I going to have enough information when I do this? And kind of put yourself, sort of challenge yourself to logically sort of think through the design in what essentially is the most unhappy possible path, and see if it can still hold up or does it then start to fall apart because people don't have access to all the contextual pieces that are sort of the perfect happy path?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was thinking about, I don't know if you're going to answer this question actually, but I'm curious about it. But do you can think of some patterns, design patterns that today are pretty common out there that maybe unintentionally taken the autonomy away from users?
Yeah, so one that I struggle with a lot in my own daily life is when, and this is true on many interfaces because it's actually a pretty challenging one, but oftentimes when you choose to delete something, even, well, I don't want to call it a specific tech company, but one that is not the tech company that I work for, I do use that phone, and when you make a mistake or you delete an event or you delete an email and it was unintentional, getting that thing back requires remembering to shake the thing. I struggle with that a lot, so oftentimes I might not be able to get the thing back, and I also might not know what I just deleted because I do struggle at times with that working memory. And so now I'm like, okay, I have this thing that says that I deleted something. I'm trying to shake my phone and I don't see anything coming back and I don't know what I deleted. So that's, there's a couple of, there are a couple of ways to design for that. Now, I recognize I'm in tech. I know what I'm about to share with you as ways to design for that are not necessarily easy. But I will also posit that how technology is evolving right now means that in a few months, it will be a lot easier. So the two ways to really address that are to always make sure that there's some clear indication of what was just deleted or changed or whatever, that it's not just, oh, this calendar event is now gone. It's this specific calendar event at this time with these people is now gone, so that you actually know that it was that thing. And then also to provide alternate ways for the individual to undo that might be more amenable to how they operate. If you're somebody like me who's not going to really be able to process that, okay, right now I have to violently shake my phone in order to get this thing back, then what if I could just say to the phone, please give me this back? I did not mean to delete that, and then really have an easier path to get that thing back.
Well, I already want that functionality. This thing, I need it. All right, so we have some questions here in the chat, and there's one specifically that I find really interesting that is from Francisca. She's asking, do you think that it is important to include professionals coming from human sciences or social sciences who has experience working with people with disabilities or cognitive differences in tech teams?
Yes. Yeah. So let
Absolutely.
me step back here on this one a little bit, because I couldn't give a more emphatic yes here. I have an anthropology background before anything else. So I came into this whole world through anthropology, which is, we're not necessarily thinking about computer sciences. We're thinking about kind of the human mind, psychology, kind of human interactions, cultural studies. All of these are incredibly valuable in understanding how people think, and even more importantly, how messy people's thoughts can be. Because when we're designing in computer systems, I mentioned the concept of the happy path versus the not happy path. When we're designing in these systems, we're like, okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. But nobody thinks that way. It's just not a reality. And the people who are most equipped to really understand how kind of strange and nonlinear humans are the people who come from the human and social science backgrounds. I also want to add, though, that it's also really important to have people with cognitive disabilities and differences in the tech teams as well. And I think that there's actually a lot of us in the tech industry. It's just a matter of really kind of normalizing that and saying, yes, we want this perspective to be just as openly spoken about and brought forward as what would sort of be considered a neurotypical thought process.
Great. We have one more question in the chat that it comes from Mireia. What are your experiences trying to teach those concepts to computer science engineers? And if you have any tip to share.
Yeah. I started with stories, and I tried to choose stories that I thought might sound a little familiar to as many people as possible. And that, for me, is really what has always worked best. It's really hard to say to somebody, this is what you've designed here, this interaction is going to be hard for people to get through because they're not going to know this, this, and this. So they'll think, well, I would know that, and that. Why wouldn't they? That doesn't make any sense. It's a lot easier to get somebody to understand why the challenges exist and what they're really practically thinking about in terms of those challenges by looking at, okay, what's actually happening that you as a person can also understand, that's familiar to you. So, concepts of multitasking, of, having a child asking for something from you while you're on a work call and you're trying to make breakfast all at the same time. Walking and scrolling on a phone, things that people know very well, that regardless of their cognitive profile, by bringing those up and saying, this is very, like, imagine your experience with this, and then multiply the impact of that by 10. And now you have what somebody with a cognitive difference or disability might be experiencing. It's a lot easier for people to start to understand why these principles matter, and also to figure out how to apply them practically, rather than just saying, oh, okay, yes, we need to make sure that we're not relying on people understanding what the concept of tipping in the United States is, because not everybody who's reading this is going to understand what that concept means. It's a lot easier for them to apply that and then figure out what to do next.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I know that we are really close to our time, but I will have to pick only one of the next questions. And I will go with my favorite and my question. So, well, in Spain or in Europe in general, in Latin America, in some countries, accessibility work is currently seeing a massive push driven by legal compliance. We have European Accessibility Act right now here, and something that is interesting about European Accessibility Act is that it has its own standard in some way. This standard, right, integrates the points of WCAG 2.1, but it also contains one article, a tiny one, that is actually, if we can see a parallelism with Section 508, that has this point that is pretty similar. That is just a short article that prays that you have to consider cognitive accessibility and including everybody with any kind of cognitive disability in order for your product to be considered compliant. What is the gap and the issue that I usually find, and any of the other consultants or auditors may find, is that you have like this complete guide with the WCAG 2.1 saying, well, this is how you conform to it. And then you have this tiny article saying, and cognitive accessibility for everyone with a cognitive disability. And you cannot find this guidance that you may find with WCAG. And well, you're a key participant on COGA. So I was thinking about how can we apply and measure. I know it is a terrible question because it's huge, but some tips, some advice to translate COGA into our audits or products, some tips on how to navigate COGA, and of course to measure in some way this, to know if we're actually compliant or not.
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer because it is, as the first question alluded to, it is so kind of subjective in a way because it's unique to each individual and how they're, and even all the contexts that they're in. But there are a few things that can be used. So one is thinking about readability guidance. I'm not the biggest fan of the readability measures that we have right now, but there are readability measures that are kind of the closest that we have to be able to say, is this actually using clear language? Is this actually using plain language? And to run tests through, there's tools out there now as well that can be used to help with that. So that's one way that that you can kind of find a sort of a concrete number, is you can look at readability scores. The other thing that's quite wonderful is in Europe, there are actually a lot of fabulous self-advocacy organizations that work with specifically, when we say self-advocacy, this means these are groups of people who are deeply impacted by cognitive or intellectual disabilities, as the classification might be in their specific country. But they are still their own advocates. They are their own legal guardians. They make their own choices. And these organizations are often available to partner with people for testing and analysis as well, and can be a really great place to go and say, okay, well, let's have 5 or 6 people with very different cognitive profiles actually go through this and see where we succeed and where we don't. So that's another really good way to consider cognitive accessibility. And then I would just say really trying your best to follow the COGA guidance as much as possible is also going to get you a long way.
Perfect. So I will just summarize for everyone here. Let's say, first of all, simplify, make sure that it is in a plain language. And second, contact people and organizations that they will tell you if that is a good practice or not. And I would add a third one, that is document that, put everything on writing and so on, because if you're complying to or trying to comply with the standard, of course, that you need that kind of proof or instruments to show the government that you have been working on the cognitive accessibility also. Great, thank you, Ray. And well, now last question, because I have one more in the chat. We have Liz Zuniga, and she says, great presentation. Speaking of cognitive autonomy, there is currently a strong temptation in the industry to rely on automated accessibility tools, even though current technology still fails to accurately interpret complex interfaces. As professionals, the challenge is still in our hands. How can we structure human-centered design methodologies that embrace diverse and often contradictory experiences without falling into hyper-simplified designs that end up stripping away the user's control and right to choose?
I love this question, and especially that last point there, because that is a trap that people often fall into when they're trying to think about cognitive accessibility. Okay, let's make this as simple as possible. And for some people, that is what will help them and what they need. The whole concept of easy read formatting is partially based on that concept of really paring it down to being extremely simple. But as we've talked about throughout, people are so messy and their contexts change throughout the day, and they actually want different types of interactions. So you may have somebody who wants an extremely simple, straightforward interface at the end of the day, but at the middle of the day, they want all the options, and they want to be able to play, and they want to be able to dig in and do really interesting, unusual things. And so this is where a couple things come into play. The principle of flexibility and of being able to adjust in how that interface is created, or how your interface interacts with the individual, based on how they interact. So if they speak a certain way and it means they're following a certain path, you can kind of open up a certain interaction path for them that's maybe a little simpler. But if they're engaging with the AI, or asking specific questions, or taking specific actions that are more complicated, then you can kind of like a choose your own adventure novel, where you sort of send them down one path or the other by kind of flexibly adapting to what they have, what they're doing. Another one to really think about here is personalization, and recognizing that personalization is not necessarily a one and done. It's not that I'm going to go into, I use text to speech a lot, and most of the time I run my text to speech at 2x, because if it's any slower, I'm no longer paying attention, and I lose focus. But sometimes, I'm learning Italian, so I'm using text to speech now in Italian. I actually need that to go more slowly, because I've got a lot of cognitive processes going on when I'm listening. So that's something that, I'll change throughout the day. So I need access to easily change those things without having to go through a long journey to say, okay, right now I need to go fast, right now I need to go slow. And kind of allowing people to control what is, are they in dark mode? Are they in light mode? Give them that choice, but recognize that sometimes what they want is actually going to change based on their context. So it shouldn't be hidden away where it's hard to change it.
Great. And yeah, I think actually that's one of the big challenges on accessibility is how to take decisions when you have so many different kind of users, and some users have needs that are the opposite to the needs of other group of users. So yeah, you of course have the universal design, but then you have all these people outside, and personalization is usually the best solution. And that's the good thing about the digital world, that in the physical world it's not as easy to implement in accessibility. Okay. So I love the fact that you're learning Italian.
Grazie.
Possiamo parlare italiano anche. All right. So we don't have more time. We have a lot of questions because it's a great opportunity to have you here, Rain. And well, thank you very much for your time. It's been super useful, and we hope you enjoyed this moment with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we are waiting for the news and everything that is going to happen with cognitive accessibility in the next years. I think that it is going to have great things coming. I am personally waiting for Way Adaptive, if that's still a thing and it's going to happen. I'm waiting for it. And I hope to see you in Dublin. I don't know if you're coming to the next TPAC, but if you are, I will see you there.
If I'm there, I'll find you there. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rain. Bye.
Bye.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos por venir y bueno, espero que hayan disfrutado mucho de la charla de Rain. Tienen 2 jueves más una cita con nosotros, porque tenemos para el próximo jueves, va a estar con nosotros Christopher Patnoe, que él es el director de la división de Google de lo que es la creación de tecnologías de apoyo. Entonces él va a venir, él tiene más una onda muy rockstar, ya lo van a conocer, es un personaje. Y el otro jueves tenemos a Shadia Bouzara, que es el director de políticas de accesibilidad de Amazon, ¿sí? La próxima charla va a ser con el mismo formato, donde vamos a tener una charla y después preguntas con Christopher. Y después el jueves con Yadi va a ser directamente va a ser una entrevista, ¿sí? Yadi es personalmente una persona que amo y admiro muchísimo, porque, no solo porque es mi padrino de accesibilidad, sino porque imagínense el nivel de genio, de cosas que ha hecho, porque él es uno de los autores de Wicca, los tres que han venido de invitados son de W3C, pero Tim Berners-Lee, que es uno de los creadores de la web, escribió hace poco, publicó su autobiografía y ahí le agradece a Shadi por la accesibilidad de la web directamente, así que imaginen lo rey que es ese hombre, así que bueno, espero que todos tengan la oportunidad de venir y muchísimas gracias por venir hoy. No sé si la grabación va a quedar en algún lado, Cris, Mireia, y dónde lo pueden
Sí,
ver.
vamos a compartir la grabación con todos los asistentes que se han registrado y va a quedar en nuestra lista de clases abiertas. ¿De acuerdo? Así que muchísimas gracias a ti, Susi, por organizarlo, por tu magnífica gestión bueno, por estos contactos. Y a todos los presentes, evidentemente.
Adiós, nos vemos. Que tengan buen día.